Yeah, I'm turning on right now.
Okay. All right, this says
Bring it up
7:30.
to everybody else.
Pardon me?
Phone says 7:30.
Okay.
You're on,
Got my watch
baby.
2 minutes early. I love that saying of Dr. Johnson that opinions are like watches. Every man believes only his own.
Well, broken watches. 2 times a day.
Okay, we're beginning with chapter 11 tonight. And I'll warn you in advance, you're probably going to get more Old Testament than you want tonight.
No, I'll never
I
do
love
that.
But there's a good bit here. And they came nigh to Jerusalem unto Bethphage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives. And when they came nigh to Jerusalem unto Bethphage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives, he sendeth forth 2 of his disciples. Okay, here's some things to think about. Firstly, why 2? I don't know. I'm just asking you. Why 2? 1 would have been enough. But he always seems to send his disciples out by 2s. Which is,
They carry each other.
pardon me?
Noah's Ark.
Noah's Ark. Pardon me?
Maybe it was a safety thing.
Could have been, because once you got up far out of the city, it was rough. Bethphage and Bethany are sometimes described as villages, but modern archaeology would seem to indicate that that's not really accurate. They had started out as villages, at least Bethany had, about 2 miles out of Jerusalem on the road that they've gone. And by now they were essentially suburbs of Jerusalem itself, reaching all the way to the Mount of Olives. And if you've been to Jerusalem, you'll know the Mount of Olives is right there. Why'd he go there? Well, we know I went to Bethany. He had friends in Bethany. Incidentally, Bethany is where, according to John's Gospel, Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. It is also where, this is a spoiler alert, you will see later in Mark that it is where Jesus' feet are anointed with nard. Why does he, it's obvious why he mentions Bethany. Why does he mention Bethphage?
Where's Bethphage in comparison to Bethany?
Brooke said.
Oh,
Maybe it's because of what Bethphage means in Hebrew. It means the house of unripe figs. No kidding, that's what it means. And Bethany means the house of lamentation, or the house of sorrow. So there's some prefiguring going on here with Mark. So he sendeth forth 2 of his disciples, and saith unto them, Go your way into the village over against you, and as soon as you entered into it, you shall find a colt tied, whereon never man sat. Loose him and bring him. Here's where you're going to get a lot more Old Testament than you get one. When we get to the, I would bet that if I asked any of you to draw a picture of what we know as the triumphal entry, Jesus' entry into Jerusalem, which we're going to talk about tonight, that you would draw Jesus sitting on a donkey. Am I right?
Yeah, that's common.
a colt.
Now, here it says colt. That word in Greek is, what is it? Something like, it'll come to me. Yeah, I looked it up, I can't remember. That word can mean either young horse or young ass, or even young donkey, but it would be an unusual usage. Even a young mule, but that would be an unusual usage. And yet, we always think in terms of not a horse, but donkey. Well, the other gospelers specify it. And, people make fun of it because what it says in the other God, he came riding on a colt, an ass, and the foal of an ass. and think, oh, what was he have 1 foot on each one? No, that's typical Hebrew parallelism. And it's to make the point that he's riding an ass, and that's the word I'm going to use because that's the Old Testament word. An ass and not a horse. Now here's the background on that, because I found it very interesting, and I went down a rabbit hole, so I'm going to drag you down it with me.
Randolph, is an ass a mule or a donkey?
Neither. Well, I guess you could call it a donkey. A mule is the offspring of a male ass and a female horse. And they are, mules, as far as I'm concerned, are in all respects except look, speed, and voice are superior animals. There's some superior work in them. No, they really are. I've just been listening to, what's his name? Shoot, help me out. The Civil War guy.
So, which side?
Shelby Foote. Shelby Foote. Just been listening to Shelby Foote. He's going into some detail about logistics. He said that a horse required 23 pounds of fodder a day. A mule required 20 and could carry more. Don't look down your nose at mules. George Washington was the first known North American mule breeder, and he loved it. And Kit Carson rode a mule as a cavalry scout because he considered them so much steadier than horses. They really are superior animals. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about asses, all right? You would say donkey. Now, bear in mind, when we think donkey, we think burro. You know, something like this big. They can be quite large, all right? In fact, there's a type called a mammoth jack. In the 18th century, known as the Spanish jack. And the mammoth jacks can go 16 hands easily. We had one in Mount Vernon when I first started working there, and by gosh, that was one big animal. Anyhow, why? Well, here's something interesting. The rabbis of Jesus' day were divided into essentially 3 camps regarding how the Messiah would come. Okay. Now, the prophecy was supposed to be most familiar because I've quoted to you a number of times. There's the one from Daniel 7. I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven and came to the Ancient of Days. They brought him coming in glory, coming gloriously with power. And that was probably what most of them thought. We'll get to why in a minute. And there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom and so forth. All people, nations, and languages to serve him. That's the one that most of the rabbis liked. But there was another one. Zechariah 9, verses 9 and 10. This is the King James Version. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, thy king cometh unto thee. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding upon an ass and upon the colt, the foal of an ass. That's why the Gospels use that phrase, because they're referencing Zechariah here. And I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the horse from Jerusalem. And the battle bow shall be cut off, and he shall speak peace unto the heathen. And his dominion shall be from sea to sea and from the river even to the ends of the earth. In other words, one group is seeing the one who would reduce all other nations and languages to serve him, and through him Israel. Whereas the second prophecy speaks of one who comes speaking peace, and yet his dominion would extend. That's the difference. And you will notice the specific horse language in the second one, the Zechariah one, about him coming upon a colt, the foal of an ass. Because a horse is a war symbol. Horses were expensive, delicate, and all kinds of other things. And they were primarily, when people in the ancient world, and indeed even the medieval world, thought horse, what they usually thought was war, cavalry. because horses were too expensive and to be used as commonly to be used as work animals. Work animals were either oxen or mules or asses. And the horse was a war symbol, and the chariot was a war symbol. So this is the background. As I said, there were 3 schools about this. One school, he's coming as a conqueror. One school, he's coming to preach peace to the world and convert it. And some rabbis, and I find this fascinating, reconcile these 2 sayings by saying that the Messiah would come humbly to an unworthy Israel, but mightily to a worthy Israel. And since they were sure they were worthy, of course it was going to be clouds of glory and conquer the world. They only looked for a triumphant, conquering Messiah. But there are other reasons that lie even behind that, in terms of reasons for saying it's an ass and not a horse.
Volume, please.
Thank you. No, I mean it. Thank you. I've spoken to you all about this a couple of times. When I get lost in my own thoughts or search for thoughts, and the volume goes down, just let me know. I take it as a favor. There is another prophecy, much older than these, which also has some relevance here. It occurs in the 49th chapter of the book of Genesis, when Jacob is dying, and he makes a prophecy about each of his 12 sons, about what their future, what their nature will be, what their future will be. And this is what he says about Judah. Remember, Judah is the tribe of David, okay? But this is way before that. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, thou art gone up. He stooped down. He couched as a lion and as an old lion. Who shall rouse him up? The scepter shall not depart from Judah. Nor a lawgiver, very bad translation, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh come. Unto him shall the gathering of the people be, binding his foal unto the vine, and his ass's colt unto the choice vine. He washed his garments in wine and his clothes in the blood of grapes. Now that needs some unpacking, I understand that. So, Judah is the tribe from which David is descended. Judah is the lead tribe. Judah is going to be the head of all. That's why their symbol is a lion. The scepter, obviously, shows rule, kingship. I don't know why they translated this longer. A much better translation is staff. And you think the staff from between his feet. I must admit, I didn't know this, but I read this and I thought, what, he's got it laying down there while he's sitting on the throne? No. This goes all the way back to Babylon and Syria. There are many extant representations of the King of Kings seated. And in his right hand is a very long staff with the foot of it between his feet, the butt of it, and the knob on the top. It's like a great big scepter. So this is kingly language. Binding his foal unto the vine. Oh wait, until Shiloh come. Shiloh means literally 2 things. It can be, depending on which vowels you stick into it. It can mean either a gift from God or it can mean peaceful one, which I imagine was a surprise to a lot of people in Tennessee on page 52. But that's what it means, the place of peace, a peaceful one. Basically, he's saying forever. until things are made perfect. David's kingship will be forever. And unto him shall the gathering of the people be, binding his foal unto the vine, and his ass's colt unto the choice vine. The vine is one of two very common, in fact, it is the more common of the two symbols, plant symbols, that are used in the Old Testament by the prophets to symbolize Israel. I bet every one of you could guess what the other one is.
Shepherd?
Shepherds aren't plants, dear.
Oh, okay.
The fig tree.
Yeah.
It's not as common, but it is used, and we'll see both of them used in the next couple of chapters. Well, this chapter and the next one. In the Old Testament story of David and Samuel, let me read you this from 1 Kings. I'll skip the Samuel one, but I'll read it from this one. It's a little easier. 1 Kings. Right. So here's the situation, because I'm trying to get you interested in the Old Testament. This is really part of the soap opera bit. David is dying. And the question is, which of his sons will succeed him? Or indeed, will it be one of the descendants of Saul who will succeed him? And he's dying. All right? So Bathsheba went to the king in his chamber. Now the king was very old, and Abishag the Shunammite, this very beautiful young woman they sent for, was ministering to the king. Bathsheba bowed and did obeisance to the king. And the king said, "What do you desire?" He knew her well. She said to him, "My lord, you swore to your maidservant by the Lord your God, saying, Solomon your son shall reign after me, and he shall sit upon my throne. And now behold, Adonijah," this is an elder son by another woman, "is king, although you, my lord the king, do not know it. He has sacrificed oxen, fatlings, and sheep in abundance, and has invited all the sons of the king, Abiathar the priest, and Joab the commander of the army. But Solomon your servant he has not invited."
May I ask a question here?
Yeah.
About this? Is she lying to him and taking
No,
credit?
she's telling him the truth.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
"And now, my lord the king, the eyes of all Israel are upon you to tell them who shall sit on the throne of my lord the king after him. Otherwise it will come to pass, when my lord the king sleeps with his fathers, that I and my son Solomon will be counted offenders." While she was still speaking with the king, Nathan the prophet, probably his most trusted advisor, came in, and they told the king, "Here is Nathan the prophet." And when he came in before the king, he bowed before the king with his face to the ground. And Nathan said, "My lord the king, have you said, Adonijah shall reign after me, and he shall sit upon my throne? For he has gone down this day and has sacrificed oxen, fatlings, and sheep in abundance, and has invited all the king's son, Joab the commander of the army, and Abiathar the priest. And behold, they are eating and drinking before him, and saying, Long live King Adonijah. But me, your servant, and Zadok the priest, and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and your servant Solomon, he has not invited." These are all senior military or civil servants. "Has this thing been brought about by my lord the king, and you have not told your servants who should sit on the throne of the lord the king after him?" Then King David answered, "Call Bathsheba to me." So she came into the king's presence and stood before the king. And the king swore, saying, "As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my soul out of every adversity, as I swore to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, saying, Solomon your son shall reign after me, and he shall sit upon my throne in my stead, even so will I do this day." Then Bathsheba bowed with her face to the ground, and did obeisance to the king and said, "May my lord King David live forever." Obviously just a form of words, because he's pretty near dead at this point. Now this is the point. King David said to him, "Call to me Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada." So they came before the king. And the king said to them, "Take with you the servants of your lord, and cause Solomon my son to ride on my own mule," some translations say ass, "and bring him down to Gihon, and let Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet there anoint him king over Israel, then blow the trumpets and say, 'Long live King Solomon.'" Notice the significance here. It was customary for the kings of Judah, and I don't know if it was customary anywhere else at all, for the kings to ride asses or occasionally mules. I don't. All the other kings, when you see them represented riding, it's in chariots with a couple of horsemen, usually 2 horsemen. But that wasn't the kingly procession animal or the kingly travel animal for Judah for some reason. So when Jesus comes in, this is not, as you will hear 1,000 times over and over and over and over and over, this is not a sign of some sort of diffident meekness. It is a sign of peacefulness, but it is also a sign of royal authority. And royal authority rather than purely military power. Authority and power are 2 different things. Jesus, by coming into Jerusalem, riding an ass, is claiming royal authority and royal status. So we'll get back to that when we get to the actual entry. Okay, then Jesus tells him, "Go into the village. You'll find a colt tied," "where never man sat." It's reserved. This is an animal that has been reserved for divine use. Interestingly enough, one was not supposed to offer as sacrifice oxen who had ever worked. Oxen is the only work animal that was a sacrificial animal for the Jews. But if it had ever actually worked or done any service other than serving as a sacrifice, it was not to be offered. And if any man say unto you, "Why do ye this?" say ye that the Lord hath need of him, and straightway he will send him hither. There's something hidden in this thing that ought to pop right out, but I've never heard anybody mention it before, and I didn't see it in any of the commentaries I looked at either. Jesus doesn't say, "Tell him I need it." He says, "Tell him the Lord needs it." You can read this 2 ways. You can read it either as saying, "I'm on the Lord's business, so this is what God needs from me," right? Or you can read it as, "I'm the Lord." I'll leave it up to you. Either would be a legitimate reading, I think, but just something for you to ponder. So they found it, and it all works out the way he said. And they brought the colt to Jesus and cast their garments on him, and he sat upon him. What's going on here? Jesus obviously has made prior arrangements for this entry. None of this is casual. These people are looking. They know that they know that someone may be coming to them from Jesus to ask for the use of that animal, and it's tied right there. And I don't think it's any coincidence that in Jacob's prophecy in Genesis 49, it says, "Binding his foal unto the vine, and his ass's colt unto the choice vine." In other words, it's bound. And as this animal is also bound. All right. I gotta catch up with where I am. Get ahead of myself.
Randolph, the animal is bound to the vine then, meaning Israel, or what?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. It's symbolic. Okay. No, give me this one, because that's what I've been working with. Incidentally, we always refer to this as the triumphal entry. That would probably have evoked not so much amazement or surprise as derision from any Romans. A Roman triumph was a very specific thing. It was an honor. It was the highest. It was not an office that you held. It was an honor that was given you. It was like a parade into the city. And it had very strong, there was no higher honor that the state could give than to award a general a triumph. And in the beginning, they were pretty strict about what meant only the Senate could award a triumph. There was a lesser thing called an ovation that the Senate could also award, but a triumph was tops. But in order to qualify for a triumph, two conditions had to be met. You had to have killed at least 5,000 enemy soldiers, not with your own hand, your army had to. And you had to have added territory to the Roman Imperium. And a triumph was, always ended, it was a parade of the military with prisoners and with floats, no kidding, floats, that showed some incidents from the war, from the successful war. And the last thing in the triumph was the general himself, dressed like Zeus, with his face red. Some people say that came from very ancient times, and most of their statues were terracotta. Some say it was supposed to mean anger or wrath or whatever. Riding in a chariot, which was not an instrument of war any longer for the Romans, but it symbolized war because it had been and because over. And with a slave beside him saying, "Remember, you are human." Because this was the absolute apex of any Roman military man's career. It's it's like being named a 16-star general. There's nothing to compare to it. This Galilean peasant riding in on a young ass would hardly qualify in Roman eyes for a triumph, but it was. Okay. Here we go. I got it. All right. Yeah. Okay. And many spread their garments in the way, and others cut down branches off the trees and strawed them in the way. Oh, by the way, I just can't help but tell you this. Straw is an old English version of what we would say strew.
Mm-hmm.
And please don't believe that strawberries are called strawberries because you put straw in them. Most people prefer cream and sugar. Strawberries are called strawberries because the way they put runners out around the ground, they screw themselves around. Seriously, don't believe folk etymologies. And they went before, and they that went before, and they that followed cried, saying, "Hosanna! Blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. Blessed be the kingdom of our father David that cometh in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest." This, blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord, comes from Psalm 118. There are many references to Psalm 118 here. It's a psalm of procession. It's a psalm sung when the king comes. Okay? And it is also the psalm which contains the verse, "The stone which the builders rejected has become the head of the corner."
What's the psalm number?
The Psalm 118. By the way, this, of course, we say, the Benedictus Cavani, Benedictus Cavani, blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. We say this every time we celebrate the Mass. You're of course familiar with it. That is why those of us in the altar party cross ourselves at that point, because it's a reminder that the first part of the Mass has been modeled on synagogue worship. We do the things that Jews did, and we don't do the things that Jews didn't do that other pagan peoples did in the synagogue. It's scripturally centered, it includes prayers, it includes teaching, and so forth. But at this point, we're remembering Jesus entering Jerusalem to be sacrificed. And from now on, we're not talking about synagogue worship, we're talking about temple sacrifice, and Jesus as sacrifice and priest. And Jesus entered into Jerusalem and into the temple. And when he had looked round about upon all things, and now the eventide was come, he went out unto Bethany with the 12. Why does Mark bother to tell us that? Nothing happened. I got there and I looked around and I went back. There's a reason. There's always a reason. Sometimes it takes me off to find it, but there's always a reason. At least takes me off to find it.
Years ago,
Go ahead, please.
years ago, when we were moving my father-in-law out of his house that he lived in for 50 years, movers had come and the house was empty. I remember he walked around the whole house and just looked at it. And I wonder if Jesus in some way loved the temple, or it had a meaning for him in that way. He stopped there. But I think of that.
I don't think so. I think it is a self-conscious, intentional enactment of the prophecy from the 3rd chapter, 1st verse of Malachi. This is God's promise to Israel. Behold, I will send my messenger. Now, the word for messenger here is angelos, which can mean messenger or can mean divine messenger, angel. Okay, it can mean either one. It's used both ways in the New Testament. Behold, I will send my messenger, and he shall prepare the way before me. Remember, this passage was applied to John the Baptist, right? And the Lord whom ye seek shall suddenly come to his temple, even the messenger of the covenant whom ye delight in. Behold, he shall come, saith the Lord of God. Jesus is fulfilling this prophecy that the Lord will come to his temple after the messenger has appeared.
Is this the first time that he has come to the temple
No.
in Mark's telling,
I don't believe
in
so.
Mark's gospel?
I think it may be.
Because that would make sense that
but
it comes to the
It
temple.
may be, but given that he seems to have been in all ways an observant Jew, and that he was 32 or 33 years old, it's pretty inconceivable that he would not have been to the temple for a purpose which I will get to later, the paying of taxes, something that's in all of our minds. And on the morrow, when they would come from Bethany, he was hungry, and seeing a fig tree afar off having leaves, he came, if haply he may find anything thereon. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for the time of figs was not yet. Now, come on, Jesus knew full well there weren't going to be any figs there. Anybody who has figs around, and we do at our house, you're very aware before those figs are ripe. They're green for a long time. And you know you're not going to get them before early. That just doesn't happen. They might stay late. That does happen sometimes. But to get them early, no. He went over to, he's showing something to the disciples. This is the beginning of a story, and it's a story that the disciples are going to have to figure out. The fig tree has leaves Bigly's big and kind of pretty, and they look
Oh, I'm
good.
looking
It's
down
good
at
country.
that.
But there was nothing on it to eat. There was no food there. And Jesus answered and said unto it, No man eat fruit of thee hereafter forever. And his disciples heard it. Of course they heard it. He said it for their benefit. This is another narrative in a narrative. You know, one of those broken stories where you start the story, you tell another story, then you have another story at the end, but they really complement each other. And they come to Jerusalem. And Jesus went into the temple and began to cast out them that sold and bought in the temple, and overthrew the tables of the money changers and the seats of them that sold doves, and would not suffer that any man should carry any vessel through the temple. And he taught them, saying unto them, Is it not written, My house shall be called of all nations the house of prayer? But ye have made it a den of thieves. Now, let's talk about what's going on here. Because unfortunately, too often this is seen as no more than a condemnation of corruption that is financial corruption. But it's a lot more than just that. Let's talk about the financial part first. Every year, every Jewish man 20 years or older had to pay a tax to the Jerusalem temple. It's half a shekel. Shekels were 2 denarii, so that's 2 days' wages. This tax, it was originally instituted by Moses in Exodus, and it was to pay for the upkeep of the worship. Now, in Moses' day, of course, there was no temple, but there was the tabernacle, not the tabernacle. There was the tent, yes. There was the tabernacle where the Ark of the Covenant was kept, and it was to pay for the upkeep and the religious observances that would take place there while they were out in the wilderness. And interesting, the priests were exempt. You know, I have met people, it happened more in South Africa than here, who thought that the clergy were exempt from paying taxes. We're not. Ask Gwen, she'll tell you. But somehow that idea got about. No, we're not.
We're churches.
Believe me, no, never mind. I won't go into it. But here's the thing. The temple tax could only be paid in one coin.
In one word.
Coin.
Temple money.
Temple money. But if I showed you a piece of it and you didn't know what it was, you would never know that it was temple money. Because it has images. On the reverse is an eagle, and on the obverse is the head of Baal Melkart, who was identified with Hercules. Now, how did all this happen and why? By the way, a rough estimate, and it's got to be rough because we don't have census figures, but a rough estimate of what this would amount to in modern money is about $150 million a year. Which is not, this is over and above tithing.
Who is Baal Melkart?
Baal Melkart, Baal means Lord,
Mhm.
B-A-A-L. Melkart, M-E-L-Q-A-R-T, it's usually spelled, was the patron deity of Tyre, T-Y-R-E, the Phoenician city. And in the syncretism of the Hellenistic period, he came to be identified with Hercules.
Wow, so they had that on the course.
And this was known as the Tyrian shekel. And it was the only legal way to pay the taxes. Why? Because when they average 14.2 grams in weight, which is bright for a shekel, but it contained at least 94% silver, which was the highest silver content of any silver coinage at the time. You don't make pure silver coins because it's too soft. These coins were minted entire between 126 and 125 BC and 1918 BC. After the Roman government closed the Tyre Mint so that they would have to use the Roman measure, no more were minted. So how were these guys supposed to, how were all these Jews around the world supposed to pay? The temple set up a mint, probably in or near Jerusalem, immediately when the Tyrian shekel stopped being made. And Jewish coin makers continued to make the Tyrian shekel for use in the temple. Now, they made them just exactly like the Tyrians had made them. They had the image of Melkart, crowned with laurel, and they had the eagle. Now, this is clearly contrary to any teachings about idolatry. But the rabbis declared that the Tyrian shekels are the only legal currency acceptable in the temple, having decided that the commandment to give the half shekel temple tax with its proper weight and purity was more important than the prohibition of who or what image might be on the coin. So the money changers are doing a little more than just changing money. They're dealing in this rather dicey evasion of one of the most basic commandments, the commandment against graven images. So the money changers are changing the money for the temple tax. And by the way, Josephus talks about the temple tax. And he talks about how, the amount of the money would be gathered and then sent to Jerusalem, where it would be changed into these things at whatever rate of change they were using, which was probably very favorable to the temple. And he states that the caravan from Damascus had tens of thousands of guards. That it was like a military movement. It was a once-a-year thing. The only thing I can compare it to in modern history is the Spanish treasure fleets, where once a year you send an enormous treasure, an enormous amount of wealth, and you make very sure that it's well guarded. So you can just have the sense of all over, wherever there were Jews, groups moving towards Jerusalem, some of them, like the ones from the big cities of Damascus and Alexandria, very large, very strong, bringing the temple tax in. $150 million a year is not to be sneezed at. I'd settle for it. But that's not the only reason for the money changers. Began to cast out them that sold and bought in the temple, and overthrew the tables of the money changers and the seats of them that sold doves. Now, we don't really know whether them that sold and bought involved just normal commerce. I'm hungry, I'm in the temple, it's a long way to the nearest restaurant, I want to buy a falafel, or there's a stand over there. But we do know that a great deal of the buying and selling, but it's interesting that he puts the tables of them that sold, which seems to me to indicate that there's some sort of merchandising going on. That there were many prescribed sacrifices that had to be made, and some of these were made at the temple expense for the people in general, for the nation of Israel. But there were also sacrifices made by individuals. Now, as in the pagan world, you didn't actually make the sacrifice yourself. You brought the animal to the religious authorities who knew how to do the right thing, and they made the sacrifice on your behalf. But an animal to be sacrificed had to meet certain very stringent requirements. It had to have no visible physical flaw. It couldn't be lame, it couldn't have a bad ear, it had to be healthy, and it had to be perfect physically. Well, if you're coming in from Alexandria or Rome, or even, 40 miles away, and you're not a farmer, how are you going to get a sheep down there? You're not. You're going to buy one when you get there. So part of the operation of the temple involved keeping on hand animals that had already been inspected by the priest and declared healthy, perfect, suitable to sacrifice. And that's what was being sold. The specific reference to doves, there weren't all that many animals that you were allowed to sacrifice as Jews. You could sacrifice cattle, you could sacrifice sheep, you could sacrifice goats, you could sacrifice doves. The dove was the lowest in value. It was what poor people sacrificed. It was what the not wealthy sacrificed. This is why I think there's a reference in Luke when Jesus is taken to the temple after his circumcision, that there's a reference to turtle doves. I'm pretty sure that's true.
Yes, Joseph sacrifices a dove.
Which is an indication that they were not considered wealthy enough to be able to afford a goat or a sheep or, God help us, a cow. I mean, that was very heavy duty to sacrifice cattle. And would not suffer any man should carry any vessel through the temple. What Jesus is doing here is twofold. Yes, there is action being taken against the money gouging that was going on, and it really was. But he's also making it impossible for the sacrificial rites of the temple to be performed. He's breaking the temple sacrificial system. And if you want to know why, read the book of Hebrews. Because the old blood sacrifices are gone. They're not working. They're not bearing fruit of righteousness. Look at what's going on. Here the guys who are making the sacrifices, that is, the priest, and they're not really serving God as they should. A new sacrifice is going to be made. And it's not going to be a bull or a sheep or a goat or a dove. This is really significant. One of the interesting things about John's Gospel, which is, John's Gospel is it has an enormous number of interesting things. One is, he changes the chronology. In John's Gospel, this is Jesus' first act. He goes to after his baptism. Because John is very focused on Jesus as priest and sacrifice. And he's setting that up right at the beginning. But Mark is taking it in what is probably a more accurate chronology. And he taught.
Father Brian, sorry. Does that mean that John's kind of jumping around chronologically, or that if Mark's chronology is more accurate, what do we make of John's?
John is not writing a chronology. John is writing a theological treatise. And you will see that he changes the chronology in certain ways that are really one that really means something. For instance, in his chronology, Jesus, the Last Supper, and Jesus, is it the Last Supper of the baptism? He moves it ahead a day, so that it's not being performed on the Passover, the crucifixion, but rather on the day before Passover, which was known as the Day of the Lambs, which was the day the lambs were sacrificed that were going to be eaten at Passover. John's writing theology, not history. Right, okay. And the scribes and chief priests heard it and sought how they might destroy him, but they feared him because all the people was astonished at his doctrine. Yeah, they fear him, but it's worth saying they fear the people too. And I'm going to talk about that a little later. So Jesus, having disrupted any possibility of blood sacrifice while he was present in the temple, and having denounced in the most vivid, physical, even violent terms what the financial dealings that were going on there, leaves. And in the morning, as they passed by, this is verse 20, they saw the fig tree dried up from the roots. Now, put two things together here. Jesus has denounced what's going on in the temple, and he's cursed the fig tree. What's going on in the temple has the outward and visible forms of honoring God. It's got the leaves. You can see it. It's probably very impressive. But Jesus is saying it didn't bear fruit. We're not a righteous people. And it is not doing the job. The only time in the Gospels that Jesus himself does anything that be conceived of as violence is the overthrowing of the tables of the money changers, and would not suffer. In other words, this is violent. It's the only time in the Gospel Jesus performs what might be said as a violent act. And of all of Jesus' works, the cursing of the fig tree is the only one that results in destruction. The tree is dead. It's dried up from the roots. It's dead. And Peter, calling to remembrance, said, "And Master, behold, the fig tree which thou cursest is withered away." And Jesus answering saith unto them, "Have faith in God." What? How does this work? For verily I say unto you, remember, verily is one of these prophetic words. It means I'm telling you something important. That whosoever shall say unto this mountain, be thou removed, and be thou cast into the sea, and shall not doubt in his heart, but shall believe that those things which he saith shall come to pass, he shall have whatsoever he saith. Now, does Peter understand the meaning of the tree here? That the tree is the old covenant and that it's going to be destroyed? There's a long passage. Put that. Yeah, I got that. There's a fairly lengthy passage There's a fairly lengthy passage in the 24th chapter of Jeremiah, which also references figs, which I want to read to you. It doesn't reference a fig tree per se, but it, I think it may have been resonant in the ears of Mark's Jewish hearers. This is Jeremiah.
Jeremiah what?
The Lord showed me, and behold, 2 baskets of figs were set before the temple of the Lord, after that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away captive Jeconiah, the son of Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, and the princes of Judah, with the carpenters and smiths from Jerusalem, and had brought them to Babylon. This is the first exile. It's not the final exile with the destruction. 1 basket had very good figs, even like the figs that are first ripe. And the other basket had very naughty figs. And I've talked about that, what naughty means. Which could not be eaten, they were so bad. Then said the Lord unto me, What seest thou, Jeremiah? And I said, Figs. The good figs, very good. And the evil, very evil. It cannot be eaten, they are so evil. And the word of the Lord again came to me, saying, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, like these good figs, so will I acknowledge them that are carried away captive of Judah, whom I have set out of this place into the land of Chaldeans, for their good. For I will set mine eyes upon them for good, and I will bring them again to this land. And I will build them and not pull them down, and I will plant them and not pluck them up, and I will give them an heart to know me, that I am their Lord, and they shall be my people, and I will be their God. But they shall return unto me with their whole heart. And as the evil figs, which cannot be eaten, they are so evil. Surely thus saith the Lord, so will I give Zedekiah the king of Judah and his princes and the residue of Jerusalem that remain in this land, and them that dwell in the land of Egypt. And I will deliver them to be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth for their hurt, to be a reproach and a proverb, a taunt and a curse in all places whither I shall drive them. And I will send the sword, the famine, and the pestilence among them, till they be consumed from off the land that I gave unto them and their fathers. In other words, the figs, the 2 baskets of figs here, are being used as used to predict the end of what's going on, still going on in Jerusalem, and that God will raise up his people in exile, bring them back, and they'll do the right thing. This is a classic example of remnant theology. The idea that even though there are a lot of people who are born Jews, many of them are not following God's law in their heart. They're not loving the Lord. They're showing no righteousness. And God will save by the remnant alone. In other words, God will act to whoever is obedient and recognizes his authority and worships him properly, and he will turn his back on those who don't. Yes, they're Jewish, but they've fallen away, and they've ruined they've broken the covenant with God. Remnant theology is very important in Judaism. It is more important in Christianity. Why? Because the idea is that in Jesus' last hours, he is rejected by not only the leadership of Israel, but by most of the people as well. Jesus, in effect, becomes the remnant all by himself. I skipped something. Oh, yes. This phrase about removing mountains was a very common Aramaic idiom for removing difficulties of any sort. Don't think it really means rearranging the geography. it was just an idiom for removing difficulties. So when Jesus says, have faith in God, you know, for I'm telling you that all difficulties can be removed. I'm wondering, and I don't have an answer to this, but it's a question I just can't get out, I just can't stop asking. Did Peter, and notice it's Peter again who speaks to the disciples, did Peter understand that what Jesus is predicting here confidently and in word and in deed, the end of the old covenant as the way to salvation? I don't know. I can't prove it. I'd like to think so, but I don't know. Peter is an interesting figure in many ways, and one way is he often seems to see things that the others do not, and he often seems to forget that he saw them. But Jesus said, but anyhow, yeah, that's what Jesus says. Therefore I say unto you, what things soever you desire, when you pray, believe that you receive them, and you shall have them. Now, notice, as near as we can tell, which it seems here, and it's usually taken, that this promise of God's answer to a prayer made in faith was not made to a crowd. Okay? It's made not to multitudes here, but to the disciples, and possibly just to the apostles. I got a note that says, see verse 12. What is verse 12? No, that doesn't help. I don't know what I meant by that. But it does appear that during his time in Bethany, that he is with the disciples. The term disciples and apostles is often used interchangeably, but if it's apostles, it means just the 12. It's disciples, it can sometimes mean the 12, it can sometimes mean a bunch. But given that Jesus is staying in somebody's house in Bethany, I think it's more likely it was just the 12. This has caused a lot of unnecessary grief to a lot of Christians who haven't understood that. Some people think that this is Jesus talking to everybody, that if you just have faith enough, whatever you ask for, you'll get. Well, not only is that nonsense, it's cruel nonsense. Why is it nonsense? Because we often ask for things we really shouldn't have. And we often ask for things that would be harmful to us if we got them. God's not going to do us harm because we ask for it. But it is cruel because people interpret it to say, if you pray hard enough and you really, really believe, well, God's obligated to answer your prayer no matter what you ask. That's not true. If in a horrible fit of my true nature emerging, I pray for someone's destruction, I don't think God's going to answer that because it wouldn't be good for me to have that on my soul. But more than that, the obverse is, well, if you prayed for something and it didn't happen, either there ain't no God, or he doesn't care about you, or your faith is really deficient. None of those are really good spiritual positions for a Christian to take. And the latter simply increases one's sense of guilt. A guy named Warren Wiersbe, who I don't know much about, had a great commentary. He said that kind of faith is not faith in God. It's nothing but faith in faith. In other words, or faith in feelings. Bear in mind, God is still Lord. You cannot obligate him. You cannot force his hand. You can ask, sir.
Bishop Cahoon used to say that he does answer all of your prayers, but sometimes the answer is no.
That's true. That's true. It's it's not that you're going to get what you ask for. You're going to get what God thinks you need,
And sometimes the answer is not yet.
and that is also true. And the parable of the unjust judge, I think, pushes on that idea. And when you stand praying, forgive. Just a note about the standing. Standing for prayer was the most common practice around the Near East, at least for prayer in public. There are references to kneeling in prayer, but it's always private or small group. And the most common prayer position, so common that it's referred to as the orans position. Orans means praying in Latin. Is this? Remind you of anything? A couple of things that ought to remind you of. The priest at the altar and a man on the cross.
On the cross, yeah, sure.
Okay. The other very common position was this. This position is a position when you're asking for something. This is a position for praising God or offering to God. This is a position for asking for something. You've got your hands out. It's obvious. The symbolism's obvious. We use both of these in the conduct of the Mass. This position, despite that picture of Jesus in Gethsemane, is really more of a medieval thing.
You mean the folded hands?
Hands together like this.
Yes.
And what does it mean? It comes from a ceremony that was very important in feudal Europe, where when a person made a vow of fealty, that is, I will be your man and you will be my lord, to a social superior, a knight to a lord, or a lord to a king, he would kneel and put his hands together like this, and the one receiving the oath would put his hands around it. So when you put your hands like this, you're saying, I belong to God. And you can imagine his hands saying, yes, you do. And the oath of fealty was very important. The inferior, the one making the oath, took a vow to serve and obey his Lord. The Lord took a vow to protect and take care of and sustain the one making the oath. It's a covenant. Forgive if you have aught against any, that your Father also which is in heaven may forgive you your trespasses. But if you do not forgive, neither will your Father which is in heaven forgive your trespasses. I think this too is often misread. A quick casual read. This is why you have to read closely. Look at every word. The quick reading seems to say, well, if you don't forgive, then God won't forgive you because you don't deserve it. That's not what it says. It says, your Father also which is in heaven may forgive you. The implication here is clear that if you are not willing to forgive, you are blocking God's ability. You are blocking the reception. You are not really blocking, but refusing the reception of God's forgiveness. And you can remember, you can think about the parable of the servants with, the servant with the huge debt that is forgiven. Yeah, that one. kind of making the same point. When we say in the Lord's Prayer, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. One of the best things I ever heard about this, again, it's Allison, who taught me more than anybody else. He says he believes, and I find it convincing, that this phrase is included for this reason. We can sometimes find it very hard to believe that God will forgive us. It is certainly possible, and I think it's part of the Anglican tradition, it is part of the Anglican tradition, to emphasize penitence very heavily, to emphasize repentance of sins, because that's like diagnosis, and you're not going to get cured unless you get diagnosed, all right? That we need to know that we are indeed sinful people, and we have indeed erred in many ways by what we have done and by what we have undone. Great phrase. Covers pretty much everything. And we can become so aware of that we believe that we are unforgivable. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive. And Bishop Allison says, what that's saying is, even we, as flawed as we are, can sometimes forgive other people. God's a lot better than us. He can forgive. If even we, flawed as we are, can forgive, well, certainly God can forgive. Nevertheless, these are all things that require significant dwelling upon, not in a study type way, but in a spiritual reflection type way. So I'll leave that to you. And they come again to Jerusalem, and as he was walking in the temple, it has been pointed out, this was an act of significant courage. Jesus knows that they're out to get him. They've been out to get him ever since forever, it seems like. Jesus, I asked you 3 or 4 sessions ago, please remember, for the rest of this gospel, Jesus is a man living under mortal threat. But he goes right into the temple again. And boy, the chief priests and the scribes they're there. They're going to get him this time. They're going to get him for good. And they say to him, by what authority doest thou these things? And who gave thee the authority to do these things? Well, you know what he's done. He's busted up the temple worship. And he's denounced them. So this is not an honest question. They're trying to get him to say something they can hang him with. And Jesus answered and said unto them, I will also ask of you one question. Jesus has gotten much feistier in the last couple of chapters. You notice? Yeah. He's beginning to verbally duel with these people. He's beginning to counterattack. I will also ask of you one question, and answer me, and I will tell you by what authority I do these things. And here's the question. The baptism of John, was it from heaven or of men? Answer me. That's pretty peremptory. And they reason with themselves, saying, if we shall say from heaven, then he's going to say, well, why didn't you believe him then? But if we shall say of men, they feared the people. For all men counted John that he was a prophet indeed. The fear of the people. You're going to see it over and over again here. They are unwilling to say what they believed because they fear the people. Pontius Pilate is unwilling to do what he knows is right and willing to do what he knows is wrong because he fears the people. He fears the mob. Now remember, it is Passover. Jerusalem probably has 2 to 3 times its normal population. It's pretty high anyhow. And as I think I pointed out some time ago, there have been major riots in Jerusalem. There were riots when Pompey was in Jerusalem. People were killed. Lots of people were killed. This crowd is pumped up. They are full of religious fervor. There's a much more than critical mass of human beings here. And I think the self-restraint of any mob is not to be relied upon.
Oh,
Somebody, ma'am,
do you believe then that John's statement that Lazarus was raised just a few days before all this happens, is that accurate timing?
I see no reason to doubt it.
Okay, because that's the real thing that gets all the people all in a hoorah, because they've heard this story about that guy that was really dead. I mean, he was in there for.
He was seriously dead.
He smelled bad.
It is dead.
And so that's why they're expecting a greater miracle from Jesus when he makes his not Roman triumphant
Right.
entry into Jerusalem. And that's why later they can be manipulated into being so disappointed that they will want to crucify him.
Well, somebody has said that the IQ of any mob is equal to the average IQ divided by the number of people present.
Yeah.
And I tend to agree with that. There is such a thing as a mob mentality.
Right, but there were crazy rumors going around about
Oh, absolutely.
Jesus
Lots
said.
of them. And one of the things that's clear from Josephus, and there are a couple of references in Acts 2, I think, is that Jesus was not the only person who some people thought was the Messiah. And there were these armed revolts that the Romans put down with some second-class fighting and first-class crucifixion. Had become not a common feature of life, but it did happen. And some of these revolts were pretty moderately serious. You know, they took serious military action to put down. But my point is that the people who should be exercising honest leadership out of fear have no desire beyond not irritating the crowd. And I think Pilate is particularly bad in this because he's willing not only not to do the right thing, but to do the fatal wrong thing, or at least wrong in terms of what he understood. And they answered and said unto Jesus, we cannot tell. And Jesus answering says unto them, neither do I tell you by what authority I do these things. This was not a random question. Jesus' question to them. These people, the scribes, the chief priests, and the elders, these are the folks who are supposed to be the religious authorities and the religious leaders. If they can't discern whether or not John was a true prophet, then they really don't have the authority to judge Jesus or to question his authority to judge, which is what he has done. Oh, it's about 10 to 9. So this might be a good time to open it up and see what y'all want to say. Mark.
Question. Okay, back to the Tyrian shekel.
Yeah, I
And
love that.
it's emblem of the eagle on one side and the Baal Melkart on the other.
Right.
Wasn't there a bit? I mean, this is sort of disingenuous of the temple in the sense also that wasn't there a big to do when Pilate had just come into office in Palestine and the Romans had imported some eagle emblems and put them on the temple and everybody
They
rioted
didn't
and
put them on the temple.
wherever on the
There's
temple
a
doors.
hill that they put it on the, what did they call it? Somebody help me out. The Roman fortress there that was
Oh,
higher.
The Antonia.
Yes, thank you, the Antonia.
And there was there were a bunch of people killed because of it. I mean, it was.
Yeah, well, they had rioted when Pompey carried the eagles, because the eagles were a religious symbol to the legion.
And to put them up like that, so it seems very strange that they would allow the coin to be used with an eagle emblem.
Well, as I said, they had decided that the purity and weight of the coin was
More important. Yeah. Okay.
Was it?
Money talks, but what it often says is very wrong. And the incidents of corruption in the temple, I forget whether it was Caiaphas or his nephew, one or the other of them was known as the pigeon keeper because he made a fortune raising doves for the temple. And it's pretty easy when you're the chief priest to have anybody else's doves. No, they're not quite good enough. Do something else with them. Oh, you get the
My
idea.
nephews.
Yeah, you get the idea.
Father Bragg,
Ma'am.
do we believe that when they started coining the shekel themselves, it was still the same purity, or were they
It was.
debasing that?
Yes. That was why they were so keen on it. It was still 94% silver.
Okay.
They're, you can buy some of these. They're not cheap, but they're still around. I'm kind of interested in ancient coins. I don't have one of those, but that is what the temple money was. And it's just nuts, really. When you think about it, all the pagan religions had temples all over the place, and sacrifices were going on all over the place, and there were local customs, and it really wasn't unified the way the Jews were. I believe I mentioned earlier that some people think that before the Great Revolt, which of course was after Jesus' death, that the proportion of Jews in the empire was possibly as high as 10%, and certainly in the cities it was that high. There were Jewish communities all over, and they were all sending their sacrificial money to the temple. It wasn't just the temple tax that they were sending, it was also money for tithes, and also if you wanted a sacrifice made at the temple, you had to pay for it. So all of this, the temple it has a huge amount of money flowing into it. And I really don't understand why Herod's temple wasn't considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, because it was one of the largest temples and one of the richest decorated temples. Not with, I talked to you about the grapes, right? The grapevine? No. Over the gate that went from the temple of the Gentile, I'm not sure whether it was
The court.
not from the
court of the
not from the
Gentiles.
court of the Gentiles, from the court of Israel into the court of men. I'm sorry, from the court of women into the court of Israel. There was a huge gate, massive, and it had a golden grapevine, large. And the custom was that people would have made or give money to have made gold leaves and gold bunches of grapes, which would then be affixed to it. It symbolized Israel and the prosperity of Israel. And even though it was a representation of a physical object, it was considered okay.
And And were there grapes as large as a man and made out of
They were
pomegranate?
huge.
Just
I know they were
huge,
huge, but I don't know how large, but I know they were very, very large. There was an enormous amount of gold in the temple. The temple was roofed in gold. Now, admittedly, those of you know anything about gold working know you can hammer out gold so thin that gold the size of a BB will hammer out to a space about this big. Isn't that right, Gwen? Don't they used to be at science museum? But still, it's gold. And the temple was awash in it. It was a huge proposition. It was enormous. The Jews were different from everybody else in all kinds of ways, and the temple was very much a part of how they were different from other contemporary nations.
Now, I
Sure.
have one quick question. The money changers, they were changing the money into the temple shekels,
Right.
and they were accepting Roman coins.
They'd
Any
accept
coin.
anything if it was, if it had money. If it had value.
They set the rate for it.
But the purchasing could only be done, the payment of that tax could only be done in temple shekels. We're not quite sure whether or not you could buy your sacrificial animals with pagan money. So you may have had to change for that too. Don't really know.
Use your American Express.
But
This crowd mentality and the reluctance of leaders to do what they should do reads like the 11 o'clock news.
Yeah.
only, and the atmosphere of implied potential deadly violence does too. The ancient world is a very violent place, almost like an American university. Sorry, somebody else had a hand. No? No? Okay, well, thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
We'll get back next week. We're looking at, well, the beating goes on essentially. I mean, there's still, the tension is still there, the danger is still there, the hostility is still there, and the story continues to unfold and be explained. And I appreciate you all having stuck with me through all these sessions because Mark does build, and sometimes it may seem to you it's building slowly, although to Mark's readers, I think, initial readers, it would seem pretty fast. All of his emphasis on immediacy, I think, keeping his listeners or his readers on board, heading for this increase in tension, increase in danger, and then finally, what happens? So we will see what Mark has to say about the next stage next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Rick, I don't know if you're here, but if you made the coffee, I really needed it tonight.
No, he really needs tonight. The way it was, exactly the way it was.
This water needs to be jumped.
I know, I have two different phones.
I didn't drink it all.
One is the supervisor's phone, which is one's on the envelopes, and it's also the one that's on the directory here.
When I got a quick
And the
question.
other one is a stupid grant pass,
Did
and
you ever talk about a
thing which you
secret
can't call
because
in on.
people are asking about why did he use
But my regular phones, they're all broken, I can't press the buttons in, and they don't have any, you can't see who's calling or anything. So when I tend to call out,
Did you look into that
I try to
further?
call out, I'm the one who you can just
Okay.